Hey, welcome to Solved or Unsolved, a true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brent, and this is the fourth episode of the podcast. And today we're going to talk about a serial killer, Gerard Schaefer. Now, Schaefer, he's a different person. You'll find out what I'm talking about. He was born in 1946, but the things we're going to talk about today is from like 1969 to 73. So Schaefer would have been in his mid to late 20s. So keep that in mind. He wanted to be a priest. He went to whatever church and talked to him for a while, and they said, no, we just really don't think you're what we're looking for. So they refused him. So he was all angry and actually very irate about this. So he decided, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to be a school teacher. So he goes and he gets a job somewhere. I'm not really sure where it was as a school teacher. He didn't last long at all. I think maybe like 3 or 4 months, because he was going in and he was teaching his morals, his political views, totally not doing the curriculum of what he's supposed to teach, really pissing people off. So they got rid of him really quick. So here is Schaefer. He's in his mid-20s. He needs a job. So he just decides, hey, I'm going to be a police officer. Well, Schaefer went to, I believe it was Broward County Sheriff's Department in Florida, and put his application in. But he failed the psychological evaluation. Failed it. I mean, just flat out failed it. And they said, no, we will not take you. But he went to a little small city police department just right there close, and they hired him. He got a job. So, and this is like 1972. So, things were much different then, especially in law enforcement. Then they hired a guy, this small department hired a guy that had failed a psychological evaluation from another department. There's no way that would happen now. I mean, there are such background checks that takes weeks. They go talk to your neighbors. They find out every single thing they can possibly find out about you now. Which there's still bad eggs that get through the system. There's still bad cops out there. We know that. But it's much, much better now than when it was back when Schaefer failed a psychological exam and still got hired by a department. So he's on this department, and he actually seems to be doing pretty good. He actually even got a commendation for a drug bust like a month after he was hired. But it wasn't long after they fired him. The chief actually said, and this is a quote, Schaefer didn't have an ounce of common sense. He got in trouble because he was running female traffic violators through the department's computer and obtaining their personal information, and then days later contacting them, asking them for dates. So, this needs to be a huge red flag right here. I mean, that's just unheard of, something you don't do. Well, he also, they fired him. He's out the job. But he did get another job. I believe it's Martin County Sheriff's Department there in Florida. They hired the guy. And, after doing all this would never happen today. You couldn't mess up in 2 other departments as bad as he did and still get another job. So that's a good thing for us today. Well, he goes out and he calls the sheriff. He's on patrol. The sheriff gets a phone call from Gerard Schaefer. And Schaefer basically said, hey, Sheriff, I just did something that I probably shouldn't have done. You're going to be really mad at me. So the sheriff is like, well, what is it? What did you do? He said, well, I was out on patrol, and there was these 2 teenage girls that were hitchhiking. So I stopped, and I picked them up, and I was driving them where they wanted to go. But I was telling them about how dangerous it is for especially young females to be hitchhiking, what can happen to you, how dangerous it is. He said, they just laughed at me. They didn't believe me at all. He said, so the next day I had contact. I was going to meet them the next day and meet them on the beach. So I did. I got them in my car this time, and I took them out into the woods, and just to show them a lesson, what could happen to them. And I tied them up to a tree and told them that if I wasn't who I was, what I could do to them, and trying to scare them. That's the only reason I did this. Well, so the sheriff is just like, what? What did you do? Imagine his face. I'm like, what? So what really happened, the sheriff contacted the two girls and got their side of the story. The first of the story is true. He did pick them up hitchhiking, told them how bad it was. He met them at the beach the next day. And get this, Schaefer is on duty at this time. He has his uniform on in the patrol car. He actually, what the girls said, he took them to a secluded place out in a swampy area. No one's around. The two girls were Pamela Wells and Nancy Trotter. He gagged them, tied their hands and their feet. He put a rope around their necks and tied them to a tree. Both girls, different trees. He actually told the girls that he was going to kill them, but first he wanted to torture them for a while. But he said he had to leave, and he would be back to finish the job. Well, I read that he actually had a call that he had to go respond to, is the reason that he left. So we got an actual cop. Got two young girls tied up to trees, gagged, hands and feet tied around a tree, and a noose around their neck, so if they actually struggle too much, that it'll choke them. Gets a call on his radio, "Hey girls, I'll be right back. I've got to go take this call." Yeah, it sounds crazy. Well, the two girls somehow were able to get free, and they ran. They ran and to the nearest police station, and it just so happened it was Schaefer's department where the girls showed up. So, of course, he was fired immediately, and he was charged with false imprisonment and 2 counts of aggravated assault. That's something else, too, that I want to talk about with the serial killers that we discuss on this podcast. There was a lot of things that happened to Schaefer when he was younger, a lot of signs that there were a lot of problems. But with the serial killers, I'm going to try not to get into the psychological thing of them or mental illness or things like that, because I don't understand it. And honestly, I'm not really sure anyone understands these type people. So I'm not really going to go into that. I may bring something up every now and then, but I'm not going to dwell in it much at all because I'm not sure any of us really know. So we got Schaefer, been fired 3 times from law enforcement. He's in jail for tying up these 2 girls. Well, a few days later, there's a couple guys, older guys, just walking around on the road, sort of wandered off into a secluded area. They're looking for aluminum cans. They're picking up cans to collect to make money. And they come up on what they saw, what they thought was some human bones. So, of course, they contact the police. The police come out there and actually found 2 bodies, appeared to be young females. And they worked the crime scene. They did everything. And what they had determined is that these 2 girls had been tied up to a tree and butchered, literally butchered like cattle. Yeah, it sounds pretty familiar, right? Well, through dental records, it was determined that these 2 girls were 16-year-old Georgia Jessup and 17-year-old Susan Place. They've been missing probably 6 or 7 months, just 2 juveniles that just disappeared. No one knew where they were. But Susan's mom, Miss Place, was talking about the last time that she had seen her daughter, and said that both girls were leaving her house, and they were going to go leaving with an older man that she knew as Gary Shepard. Okay? So, and they were going to play guitar down on the beach. And, of course, they never came back. But Miss Place said something didn't feel right to her, So she wrote the driver's license, the tag number on the vehicle, and wrote down a description of a blue-green Datsun. Now, that's something as a law enforcement officer that I always told, especially females. If you have a feeling of something, act on it. I think women a little bit have an extra sense that men do. A lot of the crimes that I investigated, especially sexual in nature, a lot of times the woman said, I had a bad feeling. Women listen to that feeling. If you're wrong, you're wrong. Who cares? At least you're safe. So, but now back to the story. She had written this down, and she had given it to the police, but they did nothing with it. So the police are thinking, wait a minute. We got Schaefer. He's sitting here in jail for tying up two girls. Found two girls that were tied up to a tree and butchered. So they ran the tag, and the tag came back to Gerard Schaefer, and that was his vehicle. So the police, Schaefer's in jail, but they get a search warrant to go search his residence. Well, they hit the jackpot. They really did. They found all kinds of things in Schaefer's, it was an apartment. They found a jewelry box full of literally over 100 pieces of women's jewelry. Now, most of your serial killers like to keep, trophies, something from their crime so they can relive it later. Those are over 100 pieces of jewelry in this jewelry box. They found over 100 pieces of writing and sketches that were depicting the mutilation and murders of young women that Schaefer had written. There was newspaper clippings about two women that were missing since 1969. And they found an ID piece of two of the hitchhikers that were missing. They were both 19s. He liked the young girls. That's what he went after. They'd been missing for a while, and actually their bodies were found, but no one, not even Schaefer, was charged with the murders because no cause of death could be determined. And this seems to be a repeating thing of they're finding bodies, but they can't charge Schaefer with them because there is no cause of death could be determined. I'm sure this has changed. Remember, this is in early 70s and this is in Florida. Maybe they could not at that time actually prosecute a murder if they didn't know cause of death. That's the only thing I could get out of it. There was also a piece of jewelry found of one of his neighbors back in 69 where he lived. And he complained, talking to people, he complained that she was taunting him by undressing with her curtains open. Well, a piece of her jewelry was found, and her skeletal remains were found like 10 years later. But then again, they could not determine a cause of death, so no charges were ever against Schaefer for this one. And I'm thinking about that. It seems that he liked to, quote unquote, butcher his victims. If you're doing that and all you find are bones years later, if you're butchering someone, going down below the sternum and cutting the guts out and all that, killing them that way, well, there's no guts, there's no skin, it's just bones. If you're not hitting bones with that knife, I guess that would be pretty hard to determine. You don't have a hole in the head or something like that. You don't have stab marks of where it's hitting bones. So maybe he knew pretty much what he was doing, and that's the reason that they could not determine the cause of death on these young ladies. But the body, they keep finding pieces of jewelry, and then a year later, 2 years later, whatever, they find the body of that person, but he's never charged with any of these. They just keep showing up and keep showing up. But he was finally, I believe it was in October of 73, he was charged 2 counts of first-degree murder for Jessup and Place. He was convicted and got 2 concurrent life terms for that. And, of course, he had numerous appeals. I think they said there were like 20 in all. They were all rejected. And everybody had forgotten about him. He's sitting in jail. He's going to be there till he dies. And it's around 1990, 1991. he started writing things down. And one thing he said, I'm going to read this. He said, I've always harped on District Attorney Robert Stone's list of 34. They said that they could safely say that they could connect him to 34 murders, but they could only charge him with the 2. So they're saying he killed 34 people. And Schaefer said in 1973, I sat down and drew up a list of my own. As I recall, my list was just over 80. The next day, given some more time to reflect, Schaefer went on, I'm not claiming a huge number. I would say it runs between 80 and 110 over 8 years, and he says 3 different continents. These are his words. Says, one whore drowned in her own vomit while watching me disembowel her girlfriend. I'm not sure that counts as a valid kill. He said, did the pregnant ones count as 2 kills? It can get confusing. So as you can see, this gentleman is definitely where he belonged. But in 1995, there was another inmate that barged into his cell, slashed Schaefer's throat, and stabbed both of his eyes out. The inmate was serving life plus like 20 years for 2 murders that he had committed, so, he didn't care. But Schaefer, in prison, it seemed that he had a reputation as a rat or a troublemaker, a snitch. He was not very popular in prison at all. He had been attacked once before on a different occasion, and his cell was actually set on fire twice. Schaefer, he's in prison. He's a sex offender and an ex-police officer, which is a huge thing. And it was rumored that he was an informant as well inside the prison. That crap don't fly in prison. Being the ex-cop really hurt him also. But this gentleman, I'll just keep my opinion to myself. I want to thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you would, go check out my website, solvedorunsolved.com. Also, if you're listening on iTunes or Stitcher, please subscribe to the channel and give me a positive review, a thumbs up. It really helps me out. On the last podcast, I said my social media wrong. I am on 2 social medias, Facebook and Twitter. The other podcast I said I was on Instagram. I am not. Facebook and Twitter. If you would, please follow me on those, solved or unsolved. Really would appreciate it. Again, thank you so much for listening.